lot going on.
I'm loving the setup though. The Ghostface, the Thing poster. Is that a
Yeah.
Halloween poster blanket?
It is. It is a Halloween poster blanket. Yes.
And of course, the Squishmallows. I always appreciate a good
Yes.
Squishmallow.
Yes. They had the Godzilla exclusive Squishmallows. So I had to get Mothra and Godzilla. And then they had some good Halloween ones. And then I'm a big cryptid person. So I have Mothman and a Fresno Nightcrawler, all that good stuff.
How did you get started? Kind of what was your early introduction to horror, and then sort of what were the important films or the important film to you growing up?
I watched my first horror movie at the age of 4, which, got started really early. My grandpa on my dad's side showed it to me, not thinking it was a horror movie, not realizing that maybe a 4-year-old might be a little bit more scared of a giant shark than an adult. But from there, I was such a scared kid, but I loved being scared. It was, my mom always tells stories about how I would convince her to let me watch scary things and say I won't have nightmares, and then I would be like sleeping with the lights on. So that was how I grew up. My dad and I really bonded over horror movies. He was the one that, my parents were divorced, so when I would go over to his house on the weekends, we would watch scary movies together, and then he'd bring me home, and my mom would have to deal with the consequences of watching those scary movies. Some of the big ones for me as a kid were obviously Jaws, but also The Strangers was a really big one for me when I was a teenager specifically. But that one was like, obviously, as you can see, I have all of the masks. That really shaped me a lot. Also, the movie Signs, M. Night Shyamalan's alien invasion masterpiece Signs, was a big one for me also.
I believe your bachelor's is in film studies and English, and then your master's is in film studies and gender studies. So kind of, did horror and your love of horror in any way influence this decision to go in and focus on film at overall?
Oh yeah. So I went into my bachelor's wanting to do an English degree. I loved English. I loved writing. And that's when I got really excited when I saw there was film studies, because I never had really thought about film studies as being something I could pursue. And so I ended up doing film studies. And actually, one of the reasons horror has been such a huge part of my professional and academic life is because of a horror film class I took my sophomore year of undergrad. And it was meant for seniors, but the professor gave me a pass to be in the class, and it changed my life. I realized, oh my God, you can write academically about horror. There's so many cool things you can do with horror. And this whole time I was freelance writing on the side because I wanted to still write about horror. I still wanted to do something with it, but I just kind of never thought it was realistic. I had I'll never make a living off of this, so I have to do other stuff. Went to grad school, ended up not wanting to go into academia. I got another social media job when I moved back home from grad school, and I just was working that job. I was hustling though. I was writing all the time in my free time. I was recording podcasts, I was writing, I was pitching. I was trying so hard to find a way to make it work as a more of a full-time gig, because I just loved it so much. And then I was about to actually just quit my job and say, I'm gonna make freelancing work somehow. I can't work this job anymore. I just cannot do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm married to someone, and we're able to, hopefully have a plan. And then it kind of fell into my lap that Dread Central was looking for someone to help with their social media, and someone had recommended me for the job. And I interviewed for it, and they were like, actually, do you want to have a bigger role here? And I was like, oh, sure. And it ended up morphing into this really cool opportunity where they're like, oh, you have a lot of really awesome experience. Do you want to help us in a bigger role on the site? And I said, absolutely. I took that role. And then a year later, I got the editor-in-chief role. I think at this point, take it for granted a little bit, and I need to not, because it is really cool. I mean, it's a job, so it's hard and it's tiring, but it's also really cool because I get to do what I love every day. And it is really awesome to be able to not only get sneak peeks of big movies, but also champion a lot of indie movies. That's something I love to do. I love like found footage is one of my favorites. I love queer horror. I love female directed horror. And it's really awesome to be able to put a spotlight on films like that too, and be able to have more access to find films like that, because more people are like sending me things, and it's really cool to be able to discover some cool new things along the way. Like I saw Skinamarink before a lot of people, and I know it's such a snobby thing to say, but like it's so cool being able to see films like this and then have them blow up like they do. It's kind of cool. Yeah.
But speaking of found footage, I too am also a big proponent of found footage. I think it's my favorite of the subgenres. It's always kind of the one I gravitate towards, and I mainly bring this up because one of the pieces that you've written or are working on from your website is you are writing an academic piece about two films, one of which I absolutely adore, Lake Mungo and the Poughkeepsie Tapes.
So this chapter is part of a book called Filtered Reality, which is coming out from House of Leaves Publishing soon, and it's a whole academic book about found footage. And so my chapter specifically is looking at Lake Mungo and the Poughkeepsie Tapes, and specifically talking about pseudo-documentary, so changing it from being the mockumentary to making it more like found footage and horror specific, and talking about these horror movies that try to look like documentaries and why that is so fascinating, and why it is so interesting how we construct truth and how these movies are so convincing. Lake Mungo is one of my all-time favorites. It's in my Letterboxd top 4. It's been in my Letterboxd top 4. It is so sad. It is so beautiful. It is so scary. I think it is an absolutely just like perfect piece of horror filmmaking in terms of all of the emotions that it evokes. And then the Poughkeepsie Tapes is one of the most upsetting movies I've ever seen, and I've seen it way too many times because I love writing about it because of what it does, but it is so deeply upsetting. That's not a ghost, that's my cat, I promise. Not Paranormal Activity, unfortunately, but I love both of those movies so much and what they do to make you think they're real, because the Poughkeepsie Tapes is so wild because it was initially released in 2007 at a film festival, and it like got this notoriety online of being this like super messed up movie. And there was these clips, and these clips I watched as a kid that scared the absolute shit out of me, where this guy was walking on all fours with a mask on his face, and like you was seeing that creeping up to the woman. And I saw these clips and I thought it was real. And when I finally saw it, it felt like I was watching like a cursed movie, like a cursed snuff film. So the way that it evokes that is just really disturbing and really fascinating.
Obviously, on top of everything that you've done so far, one of your bigger projects is you are co-directing a horror film. You are doing a rape revenge film. Kind of talk to us a bit about the movie, kind of what is it, what's it about, what's kind of been the production like? I mean, this is your first time directing or co-directing a movie, and kind of what's that experience like?
Yeah, so the movie's called Bystanders. It is a rape revenge film. It follows there's three groups of people that kind of come together. So we start with Claire and Gray, who are a couple going to a wedding. Abby, who is a senior in high school, who is going to a party with her two best friends, and then Cody and his frat boys, who are luring the teenage girls to a secluded cabin to rape them, drug them, rape them, and then let them loose to hunt them in the woods. And so when the frat boys let the girls loose, one of them, Abby, she survives. She runs to the road. She sees Claire and Gray. She flags them down. They try to help her. They run into the frat boys. And then we kind of see that Claire and Gray have more up their sleeves than we may have anticipated. I love rape, as I've mentioned before, rape revenge movies are just like a huge love of mine, especially women-directed rape revenge movies, and like talking about these movies and why they're necessary and like how to make a good rape revenge movie. And so it's kind of a really cool progression almost to make my own with her script and try to make something that I feel is worthy of entering the canon of female-directed rape revenge movies. And it was really amazing, and it was really hard, and it was like the best and worst experience of my life. Making an indie movie on such a limited budget is really a labor of love. And like I knew that as being a journalist, but now that I know it like firsthand, like how hard it is to make a movie and how much of a miracle it is that any movie gets made.
When it comes to recommending horror films, what is your go-to film that you will recommend to most people?
See, I usually have to ask them like to narrow it down a little bit, because I think everyone's definition of horror is so different. And so like if a coworker at one of my previous jobs was like, recommend me a horror movie, I said, okay, but like what kind do you want? Like what do you want? Gory? What do you want? And that'll kind of help me narrow it down. But it's usually people asking for like new recommendations. Like what are movies out now that I should be watching? And so like I usually try to give like under the radar recommendations that aren't like getting all the advertising. And I try to push people to watch Shudder movies as much as possible. Horror streaming service, it's the best. But some of the things that I've been recommending to people who like want just like a good scary movie, I've recommended movies like Terrified, which is an Argentinian horror film directed by Demian Rugna, which is just like a really good scary haunted house movie. And that's a really good one for people who want like a kind of like a Conjuring-esque experience, but it's a little bit different than like typical religious horror. And then I'm trying to think of what other things I typically recommend to people. It's just like, it is so like contextual and like what they like to watch. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. No,
my way, I'd be like, watch Martyrs, and they'd be like, you need to burn in hell. And like one time I recommended Dogtooth by Yorgos Lanthimos to somebody, and they watched it on an airplane, and I didn't realize they were going to do that, and they were so mad at me. And I was like, I didn't watch on a plane. My bad.
No, I mean,